Everything America does is pretty awful in terms of foreign policy. It's always done at the behest of not some democratizing principle as the way they present it here, but instead to make money for the military-industrial complex, which is like one of our most viable industries, right? And there's obviously different layers to it. Resource extraction is a huge component, whether it be illicit and not on the books resource extraction or control, opium fields that are being controlled or protected by the Marines that have no fucking clue what they're doing there in Afghanistan, even though those opiates inevitably make their way, not into America, mind you. We have fentanyl that's coming from China that's different. Or, oil. Or any kind of other natural minerals, natural resources, or even maintaining a country's economic status so that you can take advantage of their labor force at a much lower price.
Do you think America does that?
Oh, absolutely. I think the entirety of the West does that, and I do believe that they do it fairly deliberately.
I feel like I've always kind of in the back of my mind thought about it. If you're giving jobs to these third world countries, right? Like the little, not like the sewing jobs and stuff like that, like creating materials and stuff, the sweatshops. I always wondered if that was a ploy to keep them, because it's such low paying jobs. It's just enough to get by and survive, to make sure that they still stay at the end of the crack of the whip or something.
That's most jobs, Jack. I feel like most jobs that pay like 50 to 70K a year
you
are
think
just
it's
good
just enough to keep someone under submission.
I would say most jobs keep you just at the neutral point where you don't want to leave, but it's good enough where you want to stay. That's where I feel like most.
Okay, so
you don't want to recognize that you're being backed into a corner, so much so that you're both hungry and angry, because inevitably you'll bite back.
Right.
If you are relatively comfortable through a metric ton of commodities that you can consume at cheap consumer goods for the most part, you'll forget that the cost of healthcare has skyrocketed. The cost of college education, which is like one of the most significant, as it stands, one of the most significant ways of upward social mobility, which is not even that good anymore, right? But the prices have still increased. The cost of housing has dramatically increased. But hey, we get really cheap TVs.
What I wondered, how do you solve that problem? Because if you just abandon ship and you take all of those businesses that were using those resources over there, then they don't have jobs at all. And do you think that they would have to fend for themselves and then create something better, like internally? Or do you think that it's upon their government to do something for them?
I think China is a pretty good example of what has been done with respect to taking in foreign capital and then spreading it out as best as possible, and immediately developing a lot of the underdeveloped parts. I mean, if you look to the past 30 years of Chinese development and you look at the current Chinese economy in comparison to where it was before foreign capital started flooding in, and before they started taking advantage of their manufacturing power, and also, ripping the IP as aggressively as they could, perfectly openly, by the way. And our capital owners also, the business owners here, know that, right? It's not a secret, but they still want the cheap manufacturing. So they just were like, yeah, whatever, who cares? But I think their development has been pretty solid as a consequence of that. It's about how evenly you distribute the resources once you start getting in a shitload of foreign capital.
Do you trust their numbers though? Because I've heard quite a bit that they could manufacture their own profits, and a lot of the buildings they've built are built on, invisible money that was just basically taken from the people who invest, and builders use it and then plow it into the next development. And
I mean, I see it. I look at their railroads. I look at high-speed rail. If you pull up a map of high-speed rail in China from 2000 to now, in comparison to, high-speed rail in America, which is non-existent, I think that that's pretty even development in a country. We were looking at ghost cities yesterday. Yeah. Because people immediately are like, well, what about the ghost cities? Yeah. I think that was a combination of make work, which I do think is something that every good government should do. Make work, busy work. Construction being one of those ways of doing that. and thinking that the population was going to grow more than it actually did. And this happens in not only centrally planned economies, but it happens in America as well. Not to the same degree, but a lot of those ghost cities are now actually becoming more and more populated because there is need for a developed city. Like people want to move to a place where, if they move certain things around, and that is an advantage that centrally planned economies have. If you move certain things around, you can move people there as well. People want to go to a place where they can get better educational opportunities, for example. So that's what they do. They'll be like, all right, we're going to put some really good schools here. So then people start moving into what was before a ghost city. So I think that there's a lot of confusion and a lot of chaos about what gets talked about with respect to China. There are obviously awful things that the Chinese government has done, just like any other government has, make no mistake. I'm not avoiding those realities. But I think overall they have developed incredibly well, especially if you look to where they were 20, 30 years ago or where they were 100 years ago. It's insane.
By the way, this clip is brought to you by our sponsor, Epidemic Sound. They have a library of so many soundtracks and sound effects to use that you're not going to have to worry about copyright strikes. So if you're interested, the link is down below in the description. We've been using them for years. Would highly recommend them. Enjoy.